All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started, and what a good morning it is, right? So welcome. My name is Melissa Yumi Bailey. I am Program Development Associate here at the National Japanese American Historical Society. I'm here to introduce today's second 50 Objects program in our program series. So for those of you joining us for the first time, we at the National Japanese American Historical Society, also known as NINJAs, are dedicated to the collection, preservation, authentic interpretation, and sharing of historical information about the Japanese American experience. Today's program will feature the Ina family and the story of a toy tank made in camp by Itaru Ina for his son Kiyoshi. To introduce our program, we have now Nancy Ukai, who is the project director and curator of the 50 Objects Project.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday morning to join us. It's obviously a historic day. There's a lot of news that you're probably interested in following, so we're really glad that you're taking a bit of your day to join us. Hi, my name is Nancy Ukai, and I'm director of the 50 Objects Project, which explores the material culture of the World War II Japanese American concentration camps. Today we'll be discussing an unusual, intricately carved wooden tank made by a 31-year-old father in the summer of 1945 for his son, who is almost 3, and that's Kiyoshi Ina.
Hi, my name's Kiyoshi Ina, and I spent the first 4.5 years of my life behind barbed wire and guard towers in an American concentration camp.
Thank you, Kiyoshi. We're going to be looking at slides of this object, the 17th of our collection of 50. And we just want to start off talking about the fact that during World War II, toys were in short supply. And this government pamphlet, Toys in Wartime, encouraged parents at that time to overcome the conditions of war and make their own, keeping in mind that Kiyoshi and his father were 1,500 miles apart, imprisoned in different detention camps. Kiyoshi, the son, was imprisoned, as he just said, at the Tule Lake camp in Northeast California with his mother, Shizuko, and his sister, Satsuki. and his father, Itaru, was incarcerated in North Dakota at the Fort Lincoln internment camp, punished for his political dissidence. Interestingly, in this pamphlet, one of the texts says, "The war sometimes means moving families into cramped quarters that make adequate play space hard to find. The war takes away fathers. In time of war, it takes thought and careful planning by parents to see that the children's needs are met." Toys in Wartime, 1942. And so this wooden toy tank, of course, was made under conditions where the father was taken away and there were very few supplies. He made them out of wood scraps. And a tank museum curator in Europe described it as extraordinary. Kiyoshi, can you tell us what kinds of materials your father used to make this?
Well, he gathered some scrap pieces of wood that was available in the camp area, and he also used some thread spools and checker pieces to make this tank. And most of the wood, I guess it looks like pine or Douglas fir.
So what really makes this tank special is the detail that Itaru applied to crafting, especially the tracks, which rotate. And here you can see the thread spools, and they're used to move the track along. And I also would love for you to notice that on each slat on the track, 2 nails hold them to the rotating track throughout the rotating wheels. And then these are checkers. There are 11 wooden checkers used. And here you can see the thread spools, and then behind them, the wooden checkers. And Kiyoshi, what do you think your father was trying to do with these checkers?
Well, the checkers are placed so to separate a track from the body of the tank so the track could rotate. Without those checker pieces, no one could play checkers. Without the checkers, the rotating tracks would rub against the body. So that's why he had to put those checkers there to put a spacer between the track and the body of the tank so the track can move.
So what's interesting is that at Fort Lincoln, there were German prisoners. Are you aware of that? What kind of prisoners were they?
Yes, there were German prisoners that were stranded in America when the war broke out. So they were all interned into the Department of Justice camp in Fort Lincoln.
And according to someone else I've talked to, Henry Kaku, he was saying that his father, who was also incarcerated at Fort Lincoln, was taught some woodworking techniques by the German prisoners. But Itaru was already a very accomplished woodworker. I mean, the kind of detail that is in this tank is pretty incredible. Kiyoshi, would you show us a little bit how the turret swivels and how the tracks move?
The turret moves about 35 to 40 degrees, maybe 20 degrees to each side, and it just stops either way. And also the tracks could move forward or backwards. There's a close-up of the tracks moving.
Your mother said that you fell asleep with it in your arms. Do you remember the tank from when you were almost 3 years old?
You know, I don't have any memories of this tank until we moved back to San Francisco. During that period when we went to Cincinnati, Ohio for 4 years, my dad never took any photos of it, and I don't remember it in Cincinnati, Ohio. The first time I saw it was in San Francisco. I guess a lot of their personal belongings were stored away, and I never saw them until we moved to San Francisco.
And how old were you then?
When I first saw it, I was in middle school. So that was like in 1956.
Wooden toy tanks were really popular during World War II, but they couldn't be made out of metal by factories because that was a strategic material which was needed to make war armaments like real tanks and airplanes. And so toy tanks can actually be seen in other collections. And Kiyoshi's tank is really special because it has the moving tracks. As you can see on the left, that is a British-made tank that's in the collection of the Deutsche Panzer Museum in Germany. And the two on the right are in the Rosie the Riveter collection in California. The bottom right one does have rotating tracks. That was made by a wood company. But at any rate, it was patriotic to use wooden tanks because metal wasn't available. And then the other interesting thing that we were studying in this as we explored this artifact is, did Itaru have a model in mind? Kiyoshi, what do you think about that? Or what did you think? Did you talk to your father about what model it might be, or did you ever talk to him about this tank?
No, I never got to talk to him about this tank. But I don't know if he got any influence from the people that he was incarcerated with. And, most of the Germans there were in the Navy, so I don't know if they're familiar with tanks or artillery equipment. So I really don't have any idea how he designed it or what kind of information he received to build it.
So what we did at 50 Objects is we reached out to tank museum experts and curators in different places. And one curator said she thought it was a Soviet T-34 because of the way that the turret is made and also because of the wheels. And you can see an example of the Soviet T-34 on the top right-hand corner. And it was really considered the most successful tank of World War II. And in fact, German models were made in response to its effectiveness. Another curator in the UK at the Tank Museum thought it might be a Joseph Stalin IS-2. And so at any rate, this is still an open question, but it's quite interesting that the Soviet tanks are possible models for Itaru's tank, and perhaps he was looking at news photographs. So we'd like to just kind of look now at some slides of Itaru and Shizuko. And Kiyoshi, can you tell us a little bit about your parents? I know that Itaru was born in San Francisco in 1914, and he met Shizuko in 1939.
Yeah, my mother was born in Seattle, Washington, and they met during the World's Fair in 1939. And in 1941, they got married.
Only 1 year later, after they got married, President Roosevelt had issued Executive Order 9066 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and Japanese Americans, 110,000 Japanese Americans and Japanese permanent residents on the West Coast were rounded up. This is a really famous Dorothea Lange photograph of Kiyoshi's mother. Kiyoshi, this is a really famous photograph. Are you, what do you think of it when you see it?
Well, I know she's in line to register with my dad's mentor, and this is on Bush Street near the Kimon-gakko school that used to be a language school.
I believe she was pregnant with you. Is that right?
Yes, she was 2 months pregnant with me, and when they went to the Assembly Center in Tanfran Racetrack, she had a real difficult time with her pregnancy.
Where were you born, Kiyoshi?
I was born in Topaz, Utah, and we were there for about 8 months, and then the loyalty questionnaire came in, and my parents answered no, so we're transported to the segregation camp at Tule Lake, California.
All right. I think if you can see this map, the red line shows the sequence of concentration camps that Itaru was sent to over the course of, 5 years between 1942 and their family's release in 1946. But we'll be talking today about this period that's outlined in the green from 1943 to 1945. Kiyoshi, you were at Tule Lake then and were separated from Itaru for 2 years. So this photo shows Shizuko and you and Satsuki at Tule Lake. Okay, there is actually a mugshot, I believe, taken of Itaru in the upper right-hand corner.
Yes, that was a mugshot taken when you arrived at Fort Lincoln in North Dakota.
And so he was there in July of 1945. And if we're kind of, I guess, if one asks, why did he make a toy tank for a child? You're almost 3 years old. But one thing is that, war toys were popular. He also made an airplane for you. And, but we also know that there were tanks at Tule Lake. And this is a really rare photograph taken by Emily Light, a Quaker who was a teacher at Tule Lake, and she strategically placed these two inmates so that she could pretend to be taking a picture of them, but she made sure that the tanks were documented. And this was in 1943. And also in the newspapers, one would see headlines with tanks. Because in November of 1943, and your family when did they arrive in Tule Lake from Topaz?
In September, I believe. It was September.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was September 21st, 1943. They arrived in Tule Lake.
So then how did he end up in Fort Lincoln? So you arrived in September of 43, but 2 years later in July of 45, Itaru is sent to Fort Lincoln in North Dakota. And can you tell us about that?
Well, he spoke out against the U.S. government, and they labeled him as a dissident and a troublemaker. So they wanted to separate him from the other incarcerees. So that's how he ended up at Fort Lincoln. From
there, this letter from Itaru from Bismarck, he's writing to Shizuko. And one of the things he writes about is the tank that he wants to make for Kiyoshi. So in September 6th of 1945, Kiyoshi, you had chicken pox at that time.
Yeah, I had chicken pox and we're quarantined in our barracks for about 6 weeks. So I guess he, being quarantined, he wanted to make toys for us so we could spend our time doing something. And also he made the tank so I could play with it, if we go back to Japan.
So he wrote to your mother, I'm glad that Kiyoshi is finally completely well from the chicken pox, but you said Satsuki has chicken pox now, so this will be another hardship for you. He wrote, yesterday I sent 2 pair of geta, wooden sandals, and the toy tank. And then on September 11th, so about 5 days later, she wrote back and she said, I was surprised to see how well you made the tank, geta, and top. Kiyoshi is very happy. I wish I could show you his happy smile. Last night, he took the tank to his bed and slept while holding it. I don't know what he was thinking, but before going to sleep, he kept asking me, why didn't my daddy come home with the tank? Then he said an innocent thing to me. Tomorrow, let's go to the post office to pick up daddy. He made me laugh and cry.
My name is Kiyoshi Ina. I'm from Concord, California, and I spent the first 4.5 years in a concentration camp. I was born in Topaz, Utah, and I'm here to protest against the incarceration of the immigrant children here at Fort Sill.
So before we wind up, just wanted to talk a little bit about what happened after the war. I believe this photograph is taken in Ohio, that after the family reunited in South Texas at Crystal City, then is it true that you went to Ohio?
Yes, my dad had an aunt and a cousin there, and that's where we went after we were released from Crystal City. This photo here is taken like 1950. That's my little brother. He was born in 1948 in Cincinnati, Ohio.
So there's Shizuko on the left and Satsuki, you're in the middle, and then Itaru with Michael.
Michael, yeah.
On his lap, who was born in Ohio. And we'll talk later in the Q&A about how the family dealt with this trauma and whether they talked about it and how you learned about what they endured during the war. But one thing that happened was that Itaru, before you all left Ohio to return back to San Francisco, I believe is it 1951 or so, he took you on a trip to the East Coast. Can you tell us about that?
My dad, he loved this country, and being incarcerated, he was disappointed in the way he was being treated as an American citizen. But he really loved this country, and I believe that he loved this country, and he wanted to take me to the East Coast to see all the U.S. historical places. And from Cincinnati, we boarded a Greyhound bus, and we traveled to the East Coast. I don't recollect how long we were there, but we were there for quite a long time because we went to Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia. Here, this is a picture of Niagara Falls. We went to Washington, D.C., to the Arlington National Cemetery. We saw the Statue of Liberty on the right, and on the left, that's on top of the Empire State Building. And there, on the left is the U.S. Capitol, and the right is at Arlington National Cemetery, and that's the Unknown Soldier Monument on the right.
How did he take pictures of you two?
Well, on the left, you could see there's grass there, and he had put the camera on a self timer and just rested it on the ground.
Mm.
So there isn't a lot of photos of him. There's more photos of me because there was no one else to take a photo, of the both of us.
The day before, selfies. And tell us, I noticed on social media you had written about your father on his birthday, I guess.
Yeah, every birthday I try to post, a memorial. I post a photo in memory of him, and this is at the Lincoln Memorial.
Do you have memories of that trip particularly?
Just a few memories. The most I remember, you see me with the hat there, and we went to the New York Harbor, and it was a windy day, and I lost my hat there. The wind got it, and it went into the Hudson River. So I remember him setting me up on the edge of the Empire State Building, and I was really scared, but it was fenced in, so it was pretty safe, I guess. And this is a Washington Monument. I don't know who took the photo, but you could see 3 soldiers in the background coming up the stairs. And that's kind of, I always wondered, how he felt about seeing soldiers.
Did he talk to you about soldiers or the war?
No, I think during that whole period, we didn't speak a lot. I mean, he was really a quiet man. He kept a lot to himself. And, I know more about him, how he felt after he passed away through his letters to my mom and all the haiku he had written. So, I mean, we weren't really close, throughout our whole life, but we conversed. I helped him at his work, but as far as his camp experience, he never spoke about it, and I never asked. And I wish I did ask him. I wish I knew more at that period of time to ask some questions. But that would never be done.
He died at a young age. Is that right?
Yeah, he was 64. He died of colon cancer and some complications with his liver. And I remember visiting him, and he told me that he says, you have to live past 64, because he knew he was going to pass. And he said his father had died when he was 64. So he said to make my goal to live over 64.
And how old are you, Kiyoshi?
I'm 77, and next month I'll be 78. So I felt he was cheated, and all the suffering he had suffered during the war. It just makes me really sad that he never got to live a real successful and happy life after his camp experience.
What does the tank mean to you after all these years?
Well, I guess he made it with love and care, and he thought about us as we were, when we were separated. So I guess it was kind of a comfort for him knowing that he was making it for his son. And, it's really amazing how he made this tank, because, you can't even buy something like this anymore. It's made out of wood, it's handcrafted, and it took a lot of time and care to build this tank.
I feel like he's here with us now.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. I think of him all the time.
Thank you so much. So we will now enter the question and answer period. And I just would like to thank Kiyoshi for being so open and generous with his memories. So now we'll be joined by Kiyoshi and his sister Satsuki Ina, who was born in Tule Lake in 1943. She was incarcerated at Tule Lake and Crystal City. Michael Ina, who was born after the war in Cincinnati, and Akemi Yamane Ina, his Kiyoshi's wife, who was born in Topaz in 1943 and was incarcerated at Topaz and Tule Lake. Kiyoshi was born in Topaz, as you heard, and was incarcerated at Topaz, Utah, Tule Lake, California, and Crystal City, Texas. And I think it's interesting to note that both Akemi and Kiyoshi were born at Topaz, and they also spent their toddler years at Tule Lake together. And now they are working together protesting against child incarceration. And on the right-hand side, you can see a photograph of them holding giant tsuru, or cranes, to show Japanese American solidarity with the immigrant children and families who are trying to seek asylum in our country. So please ask questions in the chat, and Melissa Ayumi Bailey will be the moderator. Thank you.
Yeah, so just a brief explanation. If you are not familiar with chat and Zoom, if this is your first time, at the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar with different icons on it. The chat one is in the middle. You'll see that little message icon right there. If you click on that, the chat window will open up and you can begin to type in your questions there. And so we're going to get started now with the Q&A. I think I'm going to actually go in reverse age order here, starting with the Ina siblings. So Mike, you're going to be up first. So you were born after the war in Ohio as a result of resettlement. How does that affect your understanding of your family's history in comparison to your siblings who were incarcerated?
I never experienced what my family had experienced. I don't have much memory of my early childhood in Cincinnati. I just saw images of the snow. My mother told me about the heat that she disliked. She would watch the kids, and then when my dad came home, she would go to a theater she didn't care what movie it was. She wanted to be in air conditioning, so she just wanted to come back home to San Francisco. But my mom spoke a little bit about her camp experience. My dad told me very little, if anything at all. I learned most of their camp experience from my mom after my dad passed away. She lived with me and took care of her, helped raise her two daughters. And she told me a little bit about her camp experience, but she didn't delve into the specifics as what her letters to and from my mom had described. So it had very little effect on my childhood as far as what I remember.
So there's actually a follow-up question now for you, Mike. Do you have any memories of any post-war feelings towards you as a youngster in Ohio?
No, I don't remember anything about Ohio. The one thing that my mom told me was that after I was born, she had to take me to a pediatrician for, I don't know how old I was, a month or two. And then when they took my diaper off, they saw my Mongolian birthmark and they accused my mom of child abuse. Oh, yeah, and so they actually separated us for a while until another doctor was able to verify that that was a birthmark and not a black and blue from being hit. Yeah. Wow. But I don't remember anything personally of Ohio.
Mm. We see that birthmark now?
It's gone. I'm beautiful now.
And now, good timing there, Satsuki. So Satsuki, is the sister of Mike and Kiyoshi. So this next question is actually going to be for you. So we've heard that you're writing a book about your parents' letters and diaries. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Yes, in a lifelong process, gathering together, we found that my parents had saved the letters they had written to each other while they were separated. So there's 180 letters that were exchanged, and included in those letters were some that were secretly written on torn bed sheets and sewn inside of my father's pants. So in the letters exchange, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of things saying, I'm sending you my pants, please fix my pants. And she would say she sent her pants and didn't realize what they were doing was signaling each other that they had letters written to avoid the censors. So I am putting, and then my mother kept a diary from the time she was married until she left Cincinnati. And so I'm combining those to write the story.
So next question, we're going to jump now to Kiyoshi. And so I like this question just based on my personal connection to the Ina family. But Kiyoshi, you're a real good fisherman. Did your father teach you how to fish?
No, not really. But I remember we used to go, on a family excursion on Sundays. We go to the beach and we fish for surf perch. And I remember one time he caught a crab and then he started a fire and he took the crab apart, cut up all the legs onto him in the shell. And he put the shell over the fire and we had a mini crab feed. But other than that,
I've taken him several times on my boat, and he really enjoyed catching striped bass. And he and my brother, they did a lot of trout fishing in various lakes up in the Sierras. So that's most of our fishing experience together.
So this next question is going to be specifically for Akemi, but I'd actually like each of the panelists to talk a little bit more about your involvement with Suru for Solidarity. But to start with Akemi, you paint these beautiful cranes. And what has motivated you to paint Suru for Solidarity, who are the activists who protest family separation? And I know all of you will explain a little bit more about that.
Well, it started from the pain of just listening to the separating of families, the trauma that it's created, just from having had our experience. And I just couldn't do nothing. And when I got the paper, and people started doing these different cranes, I thought I would do some here. And it started with smaller cranes, but it's a good way of me expressing my feelings. So that's how it started.
Yes, Kiyoshi, how did you become involved with Suru for Solidarity?
Well, actually, my sister says that they're going to have a pilgrimage to Crystal City. That the Crystal City was just a small part of what occurred at that time. And there was we had a big protest. We had brought to-dos, and we asked people to fold to-dos, and we were asking for like 10,000 cranes, but we were really overwhelmed with over 40,000 cranes that we hung up on fences where the mothers and children were being held in Dilley, Texas.
Uh-huh.
So that was the beginning of our experience of protesting what was going on with the children and the separation of family.
And on that trip too, we also met mothers who had experienced being in those detention centers and had just come out, and their children, and we could see the pain, and it was really something to see that.
Satsuki, could we go to you next and have you explain a little bit more about your role with Suru for Solidarity and your experiences?
So I had been inside of one of the detention facilities in 2015 at the Carnes, South Texas Family Residential Center, and got to see firsthand, met with mothers and children, and noticed the amount of trauma that the children were manifesting. And so I went back several times under the auspices of the ACLU and participated in some protests there, and realized that while at one of the rallies that we were just 40 miles from where my brother and I had been held with my mother separated from my father in Crystal City, Texas. So that was the start of recognizing the parallels between what we experience and what is happening today.
And Mike, are you involved with Suru for Solidarity as well? Or what do you think of your siblings' role in direct activism against family separation?
I support them in their efforts to do for solidarity. They're more activists than I am. I'm sort of a passive person. I'm very introverted. I support their efforts. I agree with the goal. I mean, I think that there should never be separation of children from their parents. And hopefully from today's election results, we will treat immigrants better than what Trump has done in the last 4 years, because we're all have been immigrants and we all need a fresh start. And these people are coming to America in hopes of a better life and get away from drug wars and just the brutality of some of the countries that they're from. And so I support their efforts in their protests and for Solidarity's goal. But I'm not going to be on the front line like my sister and brother. That's their role.
We just want you to cut the checks.
Yeah.
So kind of delving back into the topic of family separation, and this is a question for all of the Inas. At some point you said the family expected to move to Japan. What happened there?
Satsuki, you should tell.
Okay. So after my parents answered no to the loyalty questionnaire and sent to the segregation center at Tule Lake, they felt so despairing about the future for their children. And because they were Kibe, that one pathway for them to a better life for the children was to renounce their American citizenship. So as the war progressed, people who were and both of my parents became activists in the Tule Lake camp, participating as members of the Hoshidan, protesting the mistreatment that they were experiencing, and also identifying with their citizenship with Japan, because they knew that if they returned to Japan and hadn't claimed Japan as their country, that they would be imprisoned as potential spies from America. So to assure their place in Japan, they were very active in participating in Hoshidan activities. So the plan was that they would be removed to Japan along with others who had renounced their citizenship. But when the war ended in this cataclysmic ending with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, family members in Japan wrote and said, "Do not come back to Japan because the children will starve." And so my parents were part of the attorney Wayne Collins' effort to reverse their renunciation, and they received that reversal in 1957.
So just to keep on this same thread, Satsuki, you mentioned your mom discouraged you from taking part in protests of the 1960s. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I think they suffered so much. So, the inter-community conflict that often is a result of oppression, led to people who renounced or who said no to be looked down upon by other members of the Japanese community. And so they suffered quite a bit post-war. So when I was a student at UC Berkeley during the free speech movement, there was a lot of student activism going on, and my parents would call me every night and say, we don't want to see your face in the newspaper because bad things will happen. And that was kind of the theme of how they raised us, to make sure that we didn't put ourselves at risk by protesting anything about the government.
Sorry, 1 second. I'm just reviewing the questions again. I guess, Kiyoshi or Mike, do you have anything to add to that? Did you hear those attitudes from your parents as well?
No,
I didn't.
I
Go
didn't.
ahead, Yoshi.
No, I didn't. I wasn't. I wasn't in. I didn't go to college, and I wasn't involved in any of the free speech movements. So I kept my mouth shut and kept out of trouble.
When I was in my second year of veterinary school at UC Davis, there was a lot of anti-Vietnam War sentiment in college students, and after the first lottery, my lottery number to be drafted was number 1, and so that was something that the draft board kept following me all the time, but.
That's right.
Our class of 82 students were really anti-Vietnam War. I had about 10 Vietnam War veterans that were in my class, and they would tell us the horrific stories that they saw and what they witnessed. 3 of them had contracted rabies multiple times because in the jungle of Vietnam, they have rabid dogs that go around and they will attack people. And they were just describing the treatments, the injections that go into their abdomen of antibodies to try and fight off this lethal rabies virus. So in 72, a majority of our class decided that we were going to walk out on a final exam in a parasitology class. And it turned out that they all chickened out, and I stood my ground and I flunked it. And so I was a little pissed off with my classmates. And after that, I thought, okay, no more. I'm going to just be quiet, not say anything, don't do anything, and try and graduate from vet school. But my parents never knew, and they never told me about protests because at that time in Davis, the enrollment was like 10,000 students, and Davis was a small town west of Sacramento, and you never hear them do anything.
So continuing on this theme of protests and movements, was your family involved in the redress effort at all? Or do you have memories of receiving checks also? That's a question we asked in the last program.
So, no, the family was not involved in redress. I think my mother was asked if she would give testimony, but she was very reluctant to do that and decided not to. I was living in Oregon at the time, but I do remember when my mother got her check, and I drove from Sacramento to see her when she said her check had arrived, and I noticed that on the wall she had already framed the apology letter, and the check was somewhere in the pile of mail that had built up on her desk. And I asked her what it meant for her to get the apology letter, and she said, "I feel like I finally got my face back." So the money didn't mean much to her. I did receive redress. I'm sure Kiyoshi did. We should have shared it with Michael, but we didn't.
Well, I didn't suffer like you guys did, so I didn't deserve it. But my mom was living with us when she received her check, and she was very happy. And she did exactly like what Satsuki said, and she showed me the check, and she didn't say much, but she was happy. We had a lot of friends in the Japanese community, especially Saks Kitashima, that was real active in trying to get the redress. Yeah.
Yeah, Saks is a friend of my grandmother's, so I remember her very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a interesting question. So there's actually one of your vet school classmates is in here, Mike. So the question is, are you the only sibling without a Japanese name?
No, I have a middle name of Takeshi. And so I was the only one that was given an American name and a Japanese middle name. Kiyoshi went to school in Cincinnati, and they couldn't pronounce it, so they named him Kenny. And then my sister, Satsuki, they couldn't pronounce her name, so they called her Sandy. But they were names that were given to them by a school teacher. And luckily I had a birth certificate that had my Japanese middle name.
Mm.
Who was the classmate that just asked me?
Gail Bondurant. She said her husband was in. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, sorry, one second. We're just getting some more questions in chat. So this is a question for everybody. So the statement of feeling like you don't belong or cannot be accepted as an American resonates. The election seems to show that white Americans feel betrayed by their government. And you might feel this is a controversial statement, but do you see any parallel between the Japanese American experience and what blue-collar middle-class whites are feeling now in terms of government betrayal?
That's a mouthful.
I don't think there's a comparison because they were in prison. Blue-collar workers weren't put in detention camps. They may not have been treated as well as they would like to have been, but it wasn't like being behind fence and guard towers and tanks and machine guns.
There are different kinds of parallels, certainly, but not Japanese American experience with the blue collar, but more the repetition of separation of families and unjust incarceration.
I think it's also very interesting that our history is being used in this way, and that it's important for us to know our history so that we can fight back when people say being confined in our homes in lockdown is analogous to being in concentration camps. That argument has been put out there also during this period.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point, Nancy, that the appropriation of our history to promote someone else's agenda, to identify us as part of their movement is really damaging.
And in fact, I really have to say to Kiyoshi and to the Ina family, thank you for today. But I'd also like to point out that in June, when Suda for Solidarity held a vigil at Tanforan, Kiyoshi gave a speech and he had on a Suda for Solidarity t-shirt. And we will link to this video on the 50 Objects website and Ninja. But after he gave his speech, he raised his fist, he took off his t-shirt, and we're all thinking, what's he doing? And underneath it, he had a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on. So if anything, I feel like our community is seeing the links in the history and saying never again is now. And we are in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and people of color who've experienced this history of family separation, deportation, being put in concentration camps. So thank you, Kiyoshi. I think the legacy of the tank lives on in really strong and beautiful ways.
I want to add one thing about the tank too, because in my mother's, my father's letter to my mother, he tells her to make sure that you oil the cloth so that the tank the wheels will move. So those little pieces are attached to cloth. That's what makes it the traction on the tractor, on the tank.
Amazing. Wow. Beautiful.
I'll remember to oil that.
Well, now it's an artifact. Now it's an artifact. You actually shouldn't do anything to
it.
No.
I mean, I'm really surprised that it lasted over 70 years.
Yeah.
You know, and it still moves. And you know, I'm really scared to keep moving it because I don't want it to come apart. So it'll just sit there.
All right.
Hey, while you're in quarantine, Kiyoshi, why don't you try replicating the tank that Dad made? You're good at woodworking. You have Dad's woodworking skills.
Yeah, but it's really intricate. Some of the
I
parts
know.
I made. Yeah.
Okay, we can have a new Zoom program.
Right, I know. Instructing us. All right, so we're coming down to the last few minutes of the program. So we're going to have one last question that came from the audience, and this is for Akemi and Kiyoshi. And I know there's actually a story here. So do either or both of you remember being at Tule Lake and seeing each other?
No, I think we're young.
But there is a story though.
Yeah, there's a story that when we're leaving Topaz, my mother and I and Akemi and her mother were on the same train and on the same car going from Topaz to Tule Lake. So, I was just wondering if they ever spoke to each other.
How did, oh, sorry, Akemi, go ahead.
There's so many things that, we don't know that, but just reading that, having that record, it was just kind of amazing.
And how did you find this out?
Well, Hiromizu had sent us the train list and says, hey, you and Akemi were on the same train together, and she was 4 months old. I was 8 months old when that occurred. So, now here we are, ended up together.
And how many years have you been married?
Not very many.
But we've known each other since high school.
Oh, got it. Okay. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we went to the prom together with
different partners.
Different partners.
We have a history.
So we'll be married 3 years.
Congratulations. All right. So, well, this brings us to the end of our program. I want to thank Kiyoshi, Akemi, Satsuki, Mike, so much for participating today and sharing with us your family's history and all of these stories. And honestly, this was really great watching all of you interact as well. This is really fun. And thank you, of course, to Nancy, as always, for this fantastic project. We're just so happy that we have the opportunity to share it with our audiences. So just really quickly, just a quick thank you to our funders, the San Francisco Japantown Foundation, San Francisco Grants for the Arts, National Park Service, and the Henry and Tomoya Takahashi Charitable Foundation. Thank you so much. Without your support, we would not be able to do this program. And I'm going to turn it now over to Nancy for her closing.
Thank you. Just wanted to, again, thank everybody for being here today. It feels like a moment of solidarity with our history, the people we love, our family members and ancestors who survived the war. And again, our next, we have 2 more objects in this program. One will be a doll that Ibuki Hibi Lee, when she was around 7 years old, took to Tanforan and Topaz. That's on the right-hand side. And that will be the next one in December. And then the final one will be Tokinobu Mihara's Braille board, which was incredibly crafted to show a Japanese Braille system that he invented when he lost his sight at Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So thank you very much to everybody, including Stuart Wheeler of the Tank Museum, Laura Handel of the Deutsche Panzer Museum in Munster, Germany, Pat Fitzpatrick, and all of you who've contributed your thoughts, your stories, and your questions today. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone, and have a good rest of your afternoon and weekend. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.